hate the color of your skin? Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate, you should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
Most of us blacks, or Negroes as he called us, really thought we were free without being aware that in our subconscious, all those chains we thought had been struck off were still there. And there were many ways where what really motivated us was our desire to be loved by the white man. Malcolm meant to lance that sense of inferiority. He knew it would be painful. He knew that people could kill you because of it, but he dared to take that risk.
He was saying something over and above that of any other leader of that day. While the other leaders were begging for entry into the house of their oppressor, he was telling you to build your own house.
Welcome to the Gilchrist Experience. As we watch Malcolm and that old piece, we go back to our great philosopher, John Henry Clark, and talk about how we were back in the 60s. And we update ourselves to the 2004. And well, we're going to spend a little time on the election of 2000 and what happened in Florida. My guest today is Michael Hardy, the National Attorney for National Action Network. As you all know, Reverend Sharpton was down in Florida looking into a lot of the problems we had last time in Florida for this new election, 2004, and how the Republicans actually stole the election. Welcome to the show today, Michael Hardy, Attorney Michael Hardy. Welcome to the show, Michael.
How you doing, Winston?
Good, man.
You know, so it's always so inspiring watching your opening sequence there.
Isn't that something?
Yeah, it's very, very inspiring.
How does it make you feel that, after sitting in and watching, such a great, looking in hindsight at what he said back then?
I mean, sometimes it makes you feel like, there's always more that you could be doing because they did so much. And didn't get to complete the task, so it just gives you, this movement. It's just got its ups and downs, and it's always those moments, though, where you get to see that again and understand what it's really all about.
Well, we share that same energy when we watch Reverend Sharpton. I know you were as proud as I mean, I'm maybe more proud to be at the National Action, at the convention, at the Democratic convention when Reverend Sharpton gave his speech. I'm sure you were there.
Yeah, I mean, it was a great moment for him, but for everybody.
Yeah.
And but more important, he really, there was all this debate about the time that he took. He took the time that he did take. At least he spoke about some real substantive things, and said some things that needed to be said in an environment that needed to. It was kind of funny watching, the entire convention hall, jump up while he's talking about reparations. It's like, you got all these white folks clapping for reparations. That was kind of funny.
Right.
But anyway, it was a moment, a moment in our history.
What was it like, watching this film that I gave you to watch, Unprecedented?
Well, you should probably tell folks what Unprecedented is. You could probably tell them, but it was an interesting film to watch. I mean, it was about basically how they stole the 2000 elections.
All right. We'll talk a little bit about, what Reverend Sharpton's purpose was to go to Florida. But right after we run this piece, it's just a short piece. I think a lot of you saw parts of it last week, but we're going to try and analyze what this is all about. It's called Unprecedented, the 2000 presidential election. Roll the piece for us, please.
This is how long?
Please raise your right hand and repeat after me.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
About this stunning situation in Florida, where the Secretary of State says only 629 votes, 629 votes separate.
Reasonable certainty. Punch in the mind.
I am furious. They give me a ballot that's illegal. They put it on a machine that doesn't work.
What is at stake is the integrity of our democracy, making sure that the will of the American people.
Many people probably voted for Buchanan, meaning to vote for Gore.
What happens? Do we go to jail? Because I'm willing to go to jail.
No, I just felt that
It was mass confusion. At 7 o'clock when the polls opened, we knew that there was a problem because people were walking out of the polls distraught, calling their husbands, calling their wives, telling them to be careful.
I'm a veteran from 1942, Marine, Purple Heart. I'm entitled to my vote. They're just taking it away from me.
statewide we had complaints of everything from police intimidation, police threatening people with tickets for loitering who happen to be standing in line. We've had reports of people being required to produce multiple pieces of identification when they have a valid voter registration card. There's no such requirement under Florida law.
On Election Day, I got calls from a lot of people who complained that they had gone to vote and that the local precinct didn't have their name on the list.
They said, I don't have my name there. Why my name is not there? So they sent me to see a clerk.
There were no bilingual pollers. There were no bilingual translators. There was no one there.
You know, the story of the 2000 presidential election is a multifaceted story that has to do with decision-making at a lot of different levels and inconsistencies in policies and in voting systems and technologies.
But the story of the 2000 presidential election started long before Election Day.
Truth be told, Bush did not expect to be campaigning in Florida this hard, this late. After all, Brother Jeb is the popular governor here.
I told my brother that we were going to carry Florida for him. Is that going to be a truthful statement? It better be.
Jeb Bush first ran for governor in 1994. During a debate, he was asked what he would do if elected for Florida's black community. And he gave a two-word answer, which was proved to be both accurate and prophetic. I mean, his answer was probably nothing. That answer galled the black community.
Jeb Bush lost in 1994, but he won in 1998 with only 10% of the black vote.
You've honored me beyond measure by asking me to lead Florida forward into a new...
And he was asked, what he was going to do to reassure black voters. And he said, I guess I'm going to have to reach out to that community. And what he did was reach out and take away almost all the affirmative action programs in the state.
Furious, the state's black leaders started to organize.
We had one of the largest demonstrations ever in Tallahassee, the state capitol, protesting against Governor Jeb Bush's One Florida initiative.
There is increased interest, and it's not going to end with this year.
Blacks decided right then that they were going to mount a voter registration campaign
All the civil rights organizations from around the country had offices set up here in Florida.
We did tours around the state, going into rural communities, urban communities, community centers, all the way up to corporate buildings.
We had cards that people signed that said they were going to bring 5 people to the polls with them.
So it was an early voter mobilization program.
It's a union, it's a statement, all of us coming together saying that we're not just here. We want to make a difference.
Have we forgotten while my grandmother was hosed down?
Their efforts paid off. 65% more black voters went to the polls than in the previous election.
I'm voting Democrat all the way.
But when Election Day came, there were unexpected obstacles.
As the precincts closed later that evening, we began to get reports here in the Student Government Association from just different students about either not having their voter registration card, going to their precinct that they had voted at before, and now being told that they weren't on the roster, that their names have been purged.
Many more irregularities were confirmed when the NAACP held hearings a few days after the election.
I showed the poll worker my identification, and he looked at the roll, and he looked at me, and he said, "We have a problem, you're not on the roll." I did nothing wrong. I voted in this county. There's no reason why I should not have been on that roll, but I was not on that roll, and I was not allowed to vote.
These irregularities were reported throughout the state.
This effort is to establish a record, a public record, that will further assist the Justice Department, which doesn't seem to be actively trying to establish its own record, with respect to whether or not there have been violations of civil rights and civil rights law, and maybe.
But the most serious voting rights violation was the misuse of something called the felon purge list.
There was some type of...
That's the worst one. Welcome back. Everything you see there is upsetting. You know, after we talked earlier about the struggles that we had in the 60s and, you know, the fight to get the right to vote. And then in 2000, you know, we're supposed to be ahead of ourselves, really. You know, we're talking about 40 years later, and all this stuff goes on. Where's the legal system in all this? As an attorney, those are the federal courts that the judges of the Supreme Court now were, except for 2 that were appointed by Clinton, were all appointed by Nixon, Ford, Reagan,
Right.
and Bush 1.
Right.
And so you've seen a court in its rulings that have really narrowed, the scope of basic civil liberties on every level, and a court that is, very predisposed to what the conservative viewpoint is in this country, as probably best shown by the Fourth Circuit Court of Appeals, which is currently handling most of the terrorist-related cases. But here in Florida, you see, I mean, in 2000, everyone has written about it.
Right.
It's like it is absolutely no secret. I mean, the election was stolen outright.
Right.
Obviously, the governor of the state, who has such control over the officials, over everything that has to do with voting, all of that is a department, and one of the many executive departments within under the leadership of the governor.
Right.
Catherine Harris, which everybody knows, but it's spoken about in this documentary also. Was not only the state head of the Board of Elections, but she was the chairperson for the Bush-Cheney campaign in Florida.
Right.
Clearly a conflict of interest there. And you saw them use, in some respects, some very tried and true tactics to intimidate voters.
Yeah.
Obviously, they've used a purge list. Many people have written about this and further exposed this subsequently. Greg Palast is one of them. We had him on Sharp Talk once, about these purge lists, which were primarily African American voters.
Right.
When they went down these lists, because Hispanic voters, at least in Florida, where you have a very heavy Hispanic Cuban population, You know, the Republicans are not as concerned about them because many of them tend to vote with the Republicans, primarily because of the conflict there between the Cuban families here in the United States and those that have been that have remained in Cuba with Castro. So you see these purge lists being created primarily of African American voters, African American voters going to the polls and being intimidated in all of the traditional ways, including, you know, with these sometimes, you know, ominous threats of force. I mean, you don't need a lot, and if you don't control all of the official positions there, you know, you go in the polls and they do all kinds of tricks. You know, they tell you to vote on paper ballots and turn them in, and then you don't know what happens. You know, you had the whole Chad problem. You had, ironically though, or maybe not ironically, instructively, and this was something you have to remember, the National Action Network was one of the first civil rights organization to file a lawsuit in Florida after the 2000 election in terms of, you know, Bush stealing that election. Obviously, the NAACP, as you saw, held hearings. You had organizations from across the board that really focused on this, not to mention the legal battle you know, surrounding the whole Bush-Gore campaign. And sadly, if I may say, the Gore campaign really should have focused more on the equal protection issues as it related to the disenfranchisement of African American voters. That scenario, if you had taken that, if Bush-Gore officials had taken that scenario up through the court system, it would have been very hard for the Supreme Court and the conservative majority there to use the equal protection statutes to give the election to George Bush. And in hindsight, you know, I think even Al Gore would probably at least want to acknowledge that on some level.
Why didn't he protest?
Why didn't he? I mean, you know.
Was he part of the scheme?
Well, he's part of the scheme in the sense that, you know, when it comes, sometimes even when it comes to winning, if it means championing the cause of black people, you know, some communities choose not to do it. In some respects, you know, you could say that about, you know, the Gore-Lieberman campaign, that they lost an opportunity there to really fight that nitty-gritty in the same way that the Republicans fight these battles. You know, the Republicans, they take no prisoners, you know. If you looked at this last convention that they did here in in New York City, you know, they have a take no prisoner approach. And they know how to go at you. They know how to diminish you to whatever it is that they're trying to do. In Kerry's case, you know, a flip-flopper, a fifi, you know. You know, they're very good at that. And you know, Democrats sometimes just don't know how to just come out swinging and fighting in as determined way as is possible, and part of that is over their own racial conflict sometimes, and you know, that's just a fact. And
well, there were a lot of Jewish voters in Florida that were disenfranchised too.
Right, and that's in some respects where not Jewish per se, but the focus was more on the hanging chads than the disenfranchised African Americans.
Okay, all right. Legally, what do we as citizens have? What can we do?
I mean, well, you know, there are practical responses to that. I mean, of course, you should do all the things, knowing that an election is coming up. You know, you do all the things, you know, double check your registration status, make sure you know where your polling place is, you know, in order to prevent them from trying to deny you, even though technically, if you've been a registered voter and your name is in the book and the whole 9 yards, you really shouldn't need it. But, you know, when you go to vote, you should make sure you have some identification on you. Again, it's not so much, in one respect, if you're challenged, it's insulting and it's frustrating because, you know, taking time to go vote, you know, people all know. I mean, a lot of people work. You either got to do it early in the morning or you do it late at night. If you're working, it's hard to do it in the middle of the day. And you know, so to find the time to go do it, to make the effort to do it, and then you get to the poll and you get hit with a barrage of things to try to intimidate you and or discourage you from voting, you don't want to be in a position where you're forced to give up your vote.
Right.
I mean, you want to make sure that you've done everything to know that there's not going to be a problem when you go to the polls, you know, to make sure that your vote in fact counts.
You know, I suppose a lot of you have a lot of questions out there. I guess we should have made this a call-in. But, you know, I'm going to do, we're going to run this next section for you and see if we can't set up a call-in. But I have so much to show you. I have another part of this. We're talking about how he stole the election, and then I wanted to go in further about how he started the war and how the Bush family is behind a whole conspiracy of all kind of stuff that we can actually prove. And how is it that they're getting away with it? And how do they intimidate?
And they're still doing it.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, Bob Herbert has been doing some really great editorials about, you know, how the Florida election officials, again this year, you know, put out a felony voting list that contained over 90% only the names of African Americans, many of whom were not even felons. You know, how they have been going to the homes of elderly African Americans who are involved in voter registration efforts, using Florida state troopers, you know, in their uniforms or in plain clothes. This year, currently. You know, claiming that they are investigating voter fraud and things like that. And, you know, and when you do that to elderly Florida voters, you know, it has meaning because many of them not only lived through the Jim Crow policies in Florida, but many of them also lived through, you know, the numbers of people who were brutalized and in some cases murdered, you know, as a result of the efforts in the 1960s to win the right of Floridians to vote.
So the state troopers are replacing the Klansmen.
There you go.
That's what it looks
like. It's officially sanctioned.
Wow.
Well, they always were the Klans.
Right?
They
just wore white robes.
They just don't have to wear the robes anymore.
My goodness. This is amazing. What do we tell our kids then? How do we encourage them to fight harder since we struggle so hard and it seems to be going backwards? It's even more important for you to vote then, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the education. I mean, you know, first of all, you know, every opportunity young people get to participate in the movement, you know, they should take it. But like, you know, getting young people involved is very difficult. But I think now you have a lot of people, including the whole hip-hop movement with Puffy and Russell Simmons and others, you know, that are really going out to do voter registration drives and to bring more young people into the voting process and to make them aware of what that means. And of course, you know, you get into these debates, particularly in our community, you know, why bother, you know, who's running and this, that, and the other. But, you know, at least I've been saying, you know, going into this election that, you know, in the end, you know, the discussion is not so much about Kerry per se, or even that we vote overwhelmingly for the Democratic Party. To me, it's about really maintaining the battlefield in our struggle. You know, our struggle in the broadest sense, everything from reparations to police brutality and everything in between, which includes housing, jobs, this, that, and the other. You know, in some form, shape, or fashion, you know, the right to vote, exercising our franchise to vote is one of the many tactical weapons that we have in our struggle. And of course, while we're not going to get everything by voting, we still need to use that tool as effectively as we can. And in this election, you know, I think we need to use it to at least try to maintain a combat feel for our future struggles that does not get worse. You know, because there are many that are making the argument, you know, that this administration clearly has gone very far to the right. You know, when you look at the Patriot Act and all the Homeland Security Act and all of the things that come as a result of that, all of the liberties and rights and privileges that are slowly but surely being taken away from people in this country. And that, in the end, only makes the struggle more difficult. You know, and I think that's, you know, at least how I'm looking at it.
You know, I had planned to run the purging thing, but I think this is even more important that we can go into. I want you to pass one roll in and go to the advance. I want you to go to the Great Conspiracy. I'll give you a chance to get to that point. I believe it's, you know, it's the one past the purging, and we're going to go to the Great Conspiracy. I think that's even more. You haven't seen this tape. I didn't get a chance. I brought a copy for you.
Okay.
But it talks about how they started the war.
In Iraq.
In Iraq. This is very interesting, you know, and some interesting stuff in this piece. I just watched it this morning, so I didn't get a chance to really, you know, really talk to you about it. But I think it's important that we can always go back to the Florida election, but hopefully
did I take up too much time there?
No,
missed your clip?
No. It's just that I think it's even more important from what you were saying to go further into what they're doing now in Iraq. I mean, it's very important to see people to see how this whole strategy, stealing an election, planning the war, and Bush sitting there watching, you know, this whole thing happen, when we know for a fact that his father and the CIA are running the show. I mean, Bush is nothing but a puppet. There are a lot of people behind all this. I mean, this is a grand conspiracy. And people don't realize how important it is for all of us to understand what's going on here.
Right.
I mean, you and I, you know, being close to the movement, see it plain as day and wonder why people can't see it, because they don't get the information. The mass media is under control.
Well, I mean, it's, you know, it's so frustrating sometimes watching, you know, the corporate media. You know, and I saw somebody make a really good argument about it. You know, I mean, in one respect, you know, the media in particular is not simply supposed to be a neutral arbiter of two sides, you know, where they say, well, here's what they say, here's what they say, and you decide. The media is supposed to say, here's what they say, here's what this side says, but here are some facts. Neutral facts. And then you decide based on the real facts as to, you know, who may or may not be, in fact, being most straightforward with you.
Well, you know, even Fahrenheit 9/11, I've run that on the program, and people look back and say, you know, where did you get, you know, where did that come from? Yet we had spoken about it before.
Maintain contact with, or can easily reach, Bush's cabinet, the National Military Command Center in the Pentagon, the FAA. Information concerning these alarming events must be shared with the President by his staff. Otherwise, they would be derelict in their duties. Not surprising, then, this report by ABC's John Cochran, traveling with the President, here speaking to Peter Jennings, not long after the President left his hotel. Peter, as you know, the President is down in Florida talking about education. He got out of his hotel suite this morning, was about to leave. Reporters saw the White House Chief of Staff, Andy Card, whisper into his ear. The reporter said to the President, "Do you know what's going on in New York?" He said he did, and he said he will have something about it later. His first event is in about half an hour at an elementary school in Sarasota, Florida. Something is very odd about the President's behavior. The President is aware, by his own words, that something serious is happening in New York. He additionally has to be aware of a great deal more about the situation. You have John Ashcroft later in the day at a press conference.
Immediately after the first report of a plane crashing into the World Trade Towers, numerous federal agencies coordinating with the White House mobilized their resources.
You have Vice President Dick Cheney, September 16th on NBC's Meet the Press. He tells host Tim Russert, the Secret Service has an arrangement with the FAA. They had open lines after the World Trade Center was... Then he stops himself. You have Laura Brown of the FAA. She attends hearings of the 9/11 Commission that bear on the aviation aspects of the day. Embarrassed by previous non-forthcoming testimony about the FAA's role, she sends an email in May of 2003 to members of the media whose business cards she had collected. Within minutes after the first aircraft hit the World Trade Center, she states in her email, the FAA immediately established several phone bridges that included FAA field facilities, the FAA Command Center, FAA Headquarters, DOD, the Secret Service, and other government agencies. The U.S. Air Force liaison to the FAA immediately joined the FAA Headquarters phone bridge and established contact with NORAD on a separate line. The FAA shared real-time information on the phone bridges about the unfolding events, including information about loss of communication with aircraft, loss of transponder signals, unauthorized changes in course, and other actions being taken by all the flights of interest, including Flight 77. So, in light of all this, here's the odd thing about George Bush's behavior. He and his staff could cancel or postpone an easily postponable photo op, but they don't. Why? On 9/11, Bush acts, and I emphasize acts, as if he doesn't know, as if he's not in touch. He proceeds with, or feigns, normality. Now to something else that's puzzling. At a town hall session in Orlando, Florida on December the 4th, 2001, here's the president's own account of the early morning of 9/11.
How did you feel when you heard about the terrorist attack?
Well, thank you, Jordan. Well, Jordan, you're not going to believe what state I was in when I heard about the terrorist attack. I was in Florida. And my chief of staff, Andy Card, well, actually, I was in a classroom talking about a reading program that works. And I was sitting outside the classroom waiting to go in, and I saw an airplane hit the tower of a TV. You know, the TV was obviously on.
The president tells us he sees, on an ordinary TV set outside a school classroom, the first plane hit the World Trade Center. He gives the oddly reinforcing detail that, quote, the TV was obviously on, unquote. He continues.
I used to fly myself, and I said, well, there's one terrible pilot. And I said it must have been a horrible accident. But I was whisked off there. I didn't have much time to think about it.
Didn't have time to think about it. As if his being told, time to meet the kids, Mr. President, stops all his thought processes concerning the remarkable image of what he's told us he's just seen on an ordinary TV, on top of all his knowledge of the unprecedented situation from earlier in the morning. But anyway, could George Bush have seen on ordinary TV the first plane hit the World Trade Center? No, he could not have. The footage of that first strike only shows up on television the next day, September the 12th, 2001. It was taken by a French documentary crew that happened to be in downtown New York. The Orlando Town Hall session takes place 7 weeks after 9/11, so it can be suggested Bush confuses the second plane with the first. But how to explain this? We've all seen Andy Card do that. None of this can ever be retracted. It is an interlocking historical record. Why go on at length about this? Because it may one day become the basis for criminal court proceedings. When we come back, is George Bush one of a group of conspirators involved with the attack? Welcome back to...
What do you think?
You like those conspiracies, eh?
Well,
Hey,
I mean,
look,
I'm just watching documentaries.
You know, if you know, what's kind of interesting is one is that he was in Florida, the state that, you know, he stole the election in the state of his brother. And I mean, listen, you know, the Secret Service, FBI, the Air Force, I mean, all these people had a lot of information. And again, you know, whether or not any of what Bush said in this was a misstatement or not is really not the real issue to me. You know, it might have been a conspiracy. Clearly, once it happened, the Bush administration seemed to be well prepared for how they were going to capitalize on this to bring about a very oppressive and almost quasi-fascist agenda in this country with regard to the laws that were immediately passed in terms of the Patriot Act and everything else. And it also seemed to be an obvious time and a perfect time for all of their friends to be in a position to, you know, war profiteer, which is why, you know, Halliburton and the Cargill Group and all of those groups that have very strong connections to the Bush family are in the best position to benefit from a war, any war for that matter, but in particular then when you begin to steer the war towards Iraq. And we already know that Bush and them were looking for an opportunity to go after Saddam Hussein in a more aggressive manner. We already now know you know, that clearly he lied to the American public about the reasons for going into the war. So, yeah, you know, I mean, do I agree about the conspiracy as this clip just really showed? I mean, I don't know. I mean, because I really can't say what was in Bush's head. He might have been mistaken between the two, or, you know, he might have been whatever. But I don't think that's important. I think what's important is that they've clearly taken it in order to conspire to bring about an agenda that has been absolutely brutal towards the basic rights of the American people and that have set this country in a direction in terms of its world standing and everything else that's going to be hard to bring it back, not to mention all of the young men and women who are dying in Iraq. I mean, to me, if you're fighting a war on terror, you know, and Osama bin Laden is still out there giving the greatest hits, you know, the greatest tape hits every few months, or his second comes forward and releases, you know, the new hit tape of the week, and you haven't even found him. They don't even talk about Osama bin Laden at the Republican convention here in New York. I mean, but, you know, here's Iraq, this country, which they proclaim was waiting to be liberated from Saddam Hussein, and that the people would be there to greet them with flowers in the street, has proven to be wrong. So we're now in a war that had nothing to do with terrorism worldwide, had nothing to do with the attack on the World Trade Center. And how do you really honestly, if you're George Bush, if you're John Ashcroft, if you're Dick Cheney, how do you really look a parent in the eye and say that your son or daughter or husband or wife or brother or sister died in Iraq for a good cause? I mean, or for a just cause. I mean, you really can't. And I think that's what we really need to be battling against. I mean, the notion that people could be considering giving George Bush a second opportunity when he lied to you, when he's done nothing about, you know, the economy and all of the issues here in this country. I mean, he's given the tax breaks to the rich in terms of our community where education and public education is so important. What have they done? You know, they put these programs forward. They give it a very good sounding name, No Child Left Behind, when in fact, you know, it's really an oxymoron, because under their policy, almost every child is being left behind. The charter school programs are not working. The companies that get these contracts are making money while the charter schools themselves are suffering, and they're using and getting public monies to run those charter schools. So, you know, you've done nothing to support the basic economic and health considerations of your population, and you say, well, you know, I've done nothing about health care, I really haven't done anything about education, I've done, you know, nothing about any kind of other real economic improvements other than the tax cuts I gave to the rich, but I was distracted fighting this war in Iraq, which I really did need to fight because we now know that Saddam Hussein didn't have any weapons of mass destruction, but give me another 4 more years. I mean, it's really ridiculous.
It really is. But a lot of people don't see these clips and really understand what's going on.
And you know, but there's enough information out there. I mean, you know, people just need to really, you know, put this stuff together. I mean, you know, it is so blatant and so obvious. And you've had more books. I mean, you know, you can try to compare this to, you know, Bill Clinton, you know,
that's a joke.
You know, getting a little charge in a side room of the Oval Office to the real crimes that the Bush administration are committing. And you have people, even on their side, like Pat Buchanan, who are saying that they're out of their minds. You know, John Dean, who was part of the Watergate conspiracies, and the Nixon administration put out a book entitled, I believe it was called Worse Than Watergate, where he shows how the secrecy of this administration and the acts that are conducted as a result of that secrecy, you know, far exceed anything that Nixon might have done in Watergate. You have some real crimes going on here, you know, by this administration, and I think it was a crime to lie to the American people. You want to talk about impeachable offenses, you know, to lie to the American people, to mislead them into war, and then to allow your friends like Halliburton to get no-bid contracts and get rich off of the blood of young men and women in Iraq, I think is something that the American people have a chance. You know, you talk about liberation, you know, you talk about all of these things, and Bush, you know, they talk about liberation and liberating, you know, these people from tyranny and this, that. Well, we have an opportunity to liberate some things on November 4th, 2004, and we can start by liberating ourselves from George Bush.
Amen. Amen. You know what I'm going to do? There's one more piece. I hope we have enough time for this. Oh, it's very little. Well, let's run another 5 minutes of this.
I've just been running on.
No, but this is great. This is exactly why I'm playing these pieces, because I'm really curious to see what you have to say about this. All right, just run the next piece, and we'll probably don't have any more than we can't run any more than 5 minutes of it. But I want to hear Michael Rupert talk about the Bush administration, the cover-up, really. How they covered all this up. And the 9/11 report, that's another sham. I mean, it's really interesting. You have the other roll-in that you can roll for me?
Simultaneous coincidental incompetence at all levels in many agencies defying known laws of averages, a 54 million to 1 chance, which is the 9/11 Commission official story. There's another explanation. The U.S. Air Force is neutralized by design. The evidence indicates this is about a 1 to 1 chance. Standard procedures for dealing with aviation emergencies of all kinds have been in place and have worked for years. David Ray Griffin is the author of The New Pearl Harbor, the most widely respected critique of the official story of 9/11. He quotes the Federal Aviation Authority's Aeronautical Information Manual, Official Guide to Basic Flight Information and Air Traffic Control, ATC, procedures. It states, if you are in doubt that a situation constitutes an emergency or potential emergency, handle it as though it were an emergency. As for the military, the guiding document is ACC 113-SAOC, Volume 3, U.S. Air Defense Command and Control Operations. At the top of the first page, it reads, compliance with this order is mandatory. The first paragraph reads, in part, the ADC, Air Defense Command, is to provide North American Aerospace Defense Command with the means to detect, monitor, identify, intercept, report, and if necessary, destroy any airborne object that may pose a threat to North America in the fulfillment of the Tactical Threat Warning Attack Assessment, and to provide such information to collateral missions of NORAD. Michael Rupert, a former Los Angeles Police Department detective, was the first major 9/11 skeptic and researcher in the world, and remains one of the foremost. He was one of 40 experts on 9/11 who testified at the 6-day International Citizens Inquiry into 9/11, held in Toronto in May of 2004. I helped organize that event. At the inquiry, Michael Rupert addresses the absence of jet interceptors, but the unlikelihood of a simple stand-down order, and asks,
what if they were so confused and had been so deliberately confused that they couldn't respond?
Michael Rupert is standing by at his office in Sherman Oaks, California. Michael, thanks for this. What is the reason for the failure of U.S. military jets to show up in a timely fashion on 9/11?
Well, the simple fact is, Barry, that they didn't know where to go. The reason that they didn't know where to go was because a number of conflicting and overlapping war game exercises were taking place, one of which, Northern Vigilance, had pulled a significant number of North American fighter aircraft into Canada and Western Alaska and Northern Alaska in a mock Cold War hijack exercise. There was another drill, Vigilant Guardian, which was a hijack exercise, a command post exercise, but it involved the insertion of false radar blips onto radar screens in the Northeast Air Defense Sector. In addition, we have a confirmation, thanks to General Richard Myers, who was acting chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who told Richard Clark, as reported in Clark's book, that there was another exercise, Vigilant Warrior, which was, in fact, according to a NORAD source, a live-fly hijack drill being conducted at the same time. With only 8 available fighter aircraft, and they have to be dispatched in pairs, they were dealing with as many as 22 possible hijacks on the day of 9/11, and they couldn't separate the war game exercises from the actual hijacks.
But this was done deliberately, though.
Apparently so, and I will be saying that in my forthcoming book, Crossing the Rubicon, 9/11 and the Decline of American Empire at the End of the Age of Oil. We have done an extensive investigation on that to show that these war game exercises were apparently very well planned by someone who I will show, I believe, was Dick Cheney in the United States government to deliberately confuse FAA, NORAD, and U.S. Air Force fighter response to fulfill a prophecy that another man had once said, let one happen and stop the rest.
On that very point, we have a recording.
Hi, Boston Center, TMU. We have a problem here. We have a hijacked aircraft headed towards New York. We need someone to scramble some F-16s or something up there to help us out.
Is this real world or exercise?
No, this is not an exercise, not a test.
Now, the 9/11 Commission didn't mention the war games, is that right?
No, in their final report they did mention, I think in one paragraph, Vigilant Guardian, but the response given by NORAD Commanding General Ralph Eberhardt and other Air Force spokespeople was absolutely nonsensical, and it made no mention of any of the other war game exercises. Eberhardt's position was, in fact, which is a very ludicrous position, that the Vigilant Guardian exercise.
Whoa. Well, I mean, you know, there again, I mean, that's all the more reason, you know, why, you know, I've been saying that, you know, just as black people in this country, you know, I mean, we've really got to continue to be vigilant about what we want, how we want to get it, and where we're going. And again, I think we need to do that and be able to maintain, like I said, a battlefield, you know, in the best possible condition that we can. And to do that, I think that means, you know, making sure that we can get George Bush out of office in 2004. I mean, the facts are there. They all fit together. This man is a danger to the world, let alone to America.
But can you imagine people having this information about the war games going on? I mean, no wonder that.
Well, I mean, it's like the books that were written about Roosevelt, you know, knowing, I mean, you know, you might know something is going on, but you also know that if you allow something to happen, it's the best way that serves your tactical and strategic interests. And in the case of Bush, it was a pretext for creating wars and bringing in the notion of preemption, you know, as a new American form of superpower dominance.
But why is it that nobody in the Kerry administration is bringing out these points? Why isn't Kerry...
Kerry doesn't have an administration, but I think your point is,
I mean,
you know,
campaign.
is that they need to, because, you know, they try to be too nice in my view. You just got to go at these guys the same way they're going at you.
Of course.
You know, you got to throw some heavy blows and then let the chips fall where they may.
You think that's a setup too, Kerry? Same way as Gore in 2000?
I think it's about, you know, being a leader. And leaders can't worry about what people think about what they're doing. People are going to respect leaders that lead. That's why Sharpton, people follow him. He's a leader. You know, you're not going to be able to please all the people all the time, but you got to know where you're going. You got to know why you're going there, and you got to have a plan for getting there. And, you know, Kerry needs to articulate that a lot better if he's going to beat George Bush.
Okay. Yes, very much so. I like to give it a lot of these documentaries to the Kerry campaign. Maybe they should run it on television.
They probably have them all, you know.
You think
but it's on us, too. You know, we're the ones that are going to the poll. You know, it's that old saying, you know, if you steal on me once, you know, shame on you. But if you steal from me twice, that's, you know, shame on me.
Right.
So, you know, we have a role in this, and that role is to protect our own future.
Amen. Amen to that. I'd be very interested in hearing from the public. I'm sorry to, you know, I ran these purposely so I could get Attorney Hardy to give us the legal aspects to all this. And what we should be doing is taking a look at ourselves and making sure that we take care of business, each individual. You see these clips that I run. Thank you for your compliments and putting the information out, but I can't help it. It's what comes to me, which I've got to give to you. And it's being part of a National Action Network that I get exposed to all this stuff, you know. It's heartwarming to be associated with you, Michael. I mean, we've been in a struggle a long time, and just looking at all this.
Well, you got all the history because you got it all on tape.
Right? I can go back and show Diallo the first
That's
time she came to the network. I mean, we've seen the struggles over the last 6, 7 years, and it's just it never ceased to be unbelievable. I mean, it's frustrating. I mean, to both of us, but there's a glitter of hope to know that all this is stimulating. It's like you said, the opening. What would Malcolm say about what's happening today? What do you think he would say about that? Or Dr. Clark?
Well, I mean, they all would be leading.
Okay.
That's what they would be doing.
Same as Reverend Sharp.
They would be leading. So they wouldn't be running away from the conflict, and they wouldn't be trying to confuse people about it either.
Okay. All right. The bottom line is that we all have to participate by voting. So there's no excuse for you not voting, any of you. I mean, all of you, you don't have to be black to understand the struggle. I mean, you can see what's going on here. What advice would you give the people? I mean, other than what you've said already, but anything else you'd like to add?
Stay strong and be black.
Amen. Amen. And Michael has got a show coming up Saturday at 3:30, Channel 57. I'm going to run that piece back again, where you can see how Michael has grown to be, you know, in Reverend Sharpton's absence. I mean, you really stir us up. And his heart and soul is in it. It's a part of the struggle. And I really admire and respect what you're doing, Michael. And thank you for coming today. And
it's always a pleasure.
And we always get into something heavy, right? But stay tuned. We have more interesting roll-ins. And if anybody wants a copy of the program or The Great Conspiracy, I'll tell you where you got it. You'll see a number at the end of the program where you can call in and ask questions, all right? And maybe next week we'll have a call-in. I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of questions, right? Where do I get all this information? People bring it to you, you know? I got this from the National Action Network. And you should come to our rallies on Saturday. Every Saturday at, 9:30, 10 o'clock. 10 o'clock. At
Emmanuel AME Church.
119th Street?
Between 5th and Malcolm X Boulevard, Lenox Avenue.
All right? Stay tuned. All right? Can you run the...
Who taught you to hate the color of your skin? Who taught you to hate the texture of your hair? Who taught you to hate the shape of your nose and the shape of your lips? Who taught you to hate yourself from the top of your head to the soles of your feet? Who taught you to hate your own kind? Who taught you to hate the race that you belong to? So much so that you don't want to be around each other. No, before you come asking Mr. Muhammad, does he teach hate? You should ask yourself, who taught you to hate being what God gave you?
Most of us blacks, or Negroes as he called us, really thought we were free without being aware that in our subconscious, all those chains we thought had been struck off were still there. And there were many ways where what really motivated us was our desire to be loved by the white man. Malcolm meant to lance that sense of inferiority. He knew it would be painful. He knew that people could kill you because of it, but he dared to take that risk.
He was saying something over and above that of any other leader of that day, while the other leaders were begging for entry into the house of their oppressor. He was telling you to build your